Bezos Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Zevachim number 86, 80, 80, 85, and Pei Hey. And we're going to start from two lines from the bottom of Pei Dalet Amid Beis. So let's make this a little bigger and let's get going. So there is a concept called Shchite Chutz, that if someone takes a korban and shechts it outside the Beis Hamikdash, and then makes a like a makeshift mizbeach. Like say he builds his own mizbeach outside the Beis Hamikdash. So and then he brings the korban that he shechted outside the mizbeach. So he gets kares twice, one for shechting and one for being makriv the korban onto a mizbeach that's outside the Beis Hamikdash. Now comes along Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, and he said, "Hashoichet behema balayla." A guy shechs a korban animal in the Beis Hamikdash bifnim, but he only shechted it at night. Now, at nighttime, so he did a pasal shchita in the Beis Hamikdash. And then what did he do? Vehela b'chutz, and then he took the meat and brought it outside the Beis Hamikdash onto an altar outside the Beis Hamikdash. So then he's chayev, because of what? He's chayev because he brought kachim on outside the Beis Hamikdash onto a outside mizbeah, not belonging to the Beis Hamikdash. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. We go to Pehei Amid Aleph, and Rabbi Yochanan had a svara loitei pchusa mishayche b'chutz and mala b'chutz. This shouldn't be any different than somebody that shechts on the outside and brings it in and shechts and also is malabachot. Hi, Louis, we just began. On top of Pehei Amid Aleph. The halacha is that if you shecht on the outside of the Beis Hamikdash, you take a korban, you shecht it outside the Beis Hamikdash, and you bring it onto a mizbeach outside the Beis Hamikdash, you get two punishments. Okay, two punishments. One for shechting and one for bringing it on an outside mizbeach. So here, in Rabbi Yochanan's case, if you shechted it in the Beis Hamikdash, albeit at night, which is a pasal of shchita in the Beis Hamikdash, so, and then you'll mala b'chutz, you'll get at least one bad thing of bringing a korban outside the Beis Hamikdash. That makes sense. Masav Rabbi Chia bar Oven asked, but how do you understand this brisa? Hashoichet oif bifnim, a person shechts, let's say an olas ha'oif, inside the Beis Hamikdash. Now we know birds in the Beis Hamikdash were never shechted. In fact, if you shecht the bird in the Beis Hamikdash, like you shecht the chicken, then the bird becomes disqualified as a korban, because the only two types of bird, b'nei yoina and tar, that you have to do malika with your nail, with your fingernail. So if a person shechted, so he did a pasal shchita of a bird inside the Beis Hamikdash, so it's inside the Beis Hamikdash, he didn't violate the outside part of the Beis Hamikdash, umala b'chutz, but then takes the bird, brings it onto mizbeach outside the Beis Hamikdash, potter. Then you're potter. You're not you didn't do anything wrong. You don't get the chorus of mala b'chutz. But if shachet b'chutz, if you went outside the Beis Hamikdash, took the korban bird and shechted it outside the Beis Hamikdash, umala b'chutz, and brought it on a mizbeach outside the Beis Hamikdash, chayiv. That should be, you're held liable for both shchita and the halah. So, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, neimat leitei pchusa mishoichet umala b'chutz. Let it say that this should be no less than if you shech the bird on the inside and you mala b'chutz, at least you should get one chayiv for being mala b'chutz. Just like Rabbi Yochanan said, if you shechted an animal at night bifnim and you mala b'chutz, you get one avera. So you should, if someone shechts an oif on the inside of the Beis Hamikdash and mala b'chutz and brings it outside the Beis Hamikdash, he should at least get one avera. And how come this brisa says you don't get any avera? To Yufta, this is a refutation against Rabbi Yochanan. But the Gemara says, if you want, I can tell you it's not such a refutation against Rabbi Yochanan. Shchita sa'oif bifnim miktal katle. You see, if the brisa is very different than Rabbi Yochanan's case. What was Rabbi Yochanan's case? You shechted an animal at night, behema at night. Now, really, you're supposed to shecht the animal in the Beis Hamikdash during the daytime, but you shechted it at night. So technically, you did a shechita on the animal, and therefore the animal is not killed. It's not like it's an avela, and therefore, if you hella b'chutz, then you'll be chayiv. If you took it and was makriv it outside the Beis Hamikdash, yes, you'll be chayiv. But here, when you shchitas oif bifnim, when you're shechting a bird on the inside of the Beis Hamikdash, shchita in the Beis Hamikdash is like taking a gun and shooting the bird. It's not something that takes away from nevela, because the only permitted way of killing a bird in the Beis Hamikdash is through malika. And if you shechted it, so mikta katlets you as if you killed the bird. And then if you kill a bird and then you mala b'chutz, then you're not going to be chayiv. That's why it says potter. You see, that's why it's called, the Aveira is called shechting something outside the Beis Hamikdash. So it's only if you do a kosher shechita. But if you do something that's not kosher, like shechting a bird inside the Beis Hamikdash, when you only can do malika, that's like killing the bird. So therefore, if you're mala b'chutz, then you will not be held liable. Amma Ula said like the following. The halacha is on a kachim kam, let's say a korban shlomim. First you sprinkle the blood, and then you put the fats on the mizbeach. When you sprinkle the blood, then the fats becomes like have a holiness, that because the fats now are really the food of God, and it's called kedusha saguf. And then you're supposed to bring the fats onto the Beis Hamikdash. But what happens on the mizbeach? Amma Ula said, a murei kachim kalim, the fats of a kachim kalim, shehelan lifnei zrikas damim. Before they did the sprinkling of the carbon on the mizbeach, you guys, they rushed it through and they put the fats onto the mizbeach. Now there is no kedusha on that. There's no holy mi'ila kedusha on that fats because you didn't sprinkle the blood yet. So lo yerdu. Once it already went onto the Beis Hamikdash, onto the mizbeach, don't take it down. You did it wrong. Just sprinkle the blood after you brought it onto the mizbeach, because nasa lachbay shel mizbeach becomes the bread of the mizbeach. It's like, again, once you put the food down, so to speak, to the on the Rebbeinu Shlomo's plate, so then don't take it away. So even though it doesn't have a special kedusha to it, it doesn't have kedusha saguf. You know, a korban chatas or korban oila has a kedusha saguf right away. A korban kachim kalim, like a shlomim, does not have kedusha saguf only after sprinkling the blood. So I would think that if you didn't sprinkle the blood and you brought the fats onto the mizbeach, take it off the mizbeach because it's not kedusha saguf. It doesn't have that holiness. The Gemara says, Ula said, that becomes the bread of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and don't take it off. It's lachmei shel mizbeach. Amar Rab Zera said, afanana mitanina. It's actually a brisa. The brisa says, "Shenishbach damav sheyotze dam mechutz l'gam." If a korban, let's say, and the Gemara thinks it's a korban shlamim, that the blood spilled out, so you're never going to sprinkle the blood. If that meat ended up on the mizbeach, you leave it there. So isn't that exactly what Ula's case? That's even worse than Ula's case. Ma hosim, just like over there. The imbal is like, if you wanted to sprinkle the blood, there is no blood to sprinkle, because the Bryce is talking about if the blood was spilled on the floor and the meat ended up on the mizbeach, you leave it there. And nevertheless, Amrit, you tell me, im olu, if it went on to the mizbeach, lo yerdu, don't take it down. Hacha, in Ula's case, the imbal Lizraik, if you want to do zrika, zayrik, you could do zrika because the blood didn't spill out. So it's not as possible. So in Ula's case, when you happen to bring the fats before you actually did the zrika, like kolshkein, certainly you'll just leave the fats on the mizbeach and do the zrika afterwards. So that Ula is actually can be derived from a brisa. And says the Gemara, not so. Tir Gemara, I could interpret the brisa a kochi kochim. The brisa is talking about not any korban. It's only talking about, let's say, a korban oila. If the korban oila, the blood was spilled, and then the meat ended up on the mizbeach, then you leave it there. But not by kochi kalim, because kochi kochim has a kedusha saguf inherent in it, even before you sprinkle the blood. So, but if it was kachikalim, the brisa would agree that if it ended up on the mizbeach, take it off. Maybe the brisa disagrees with Ula. Says the Gemara, how could you say the brisa disagrees with Ula? The brisa is talking about Hare Pesach, the kachin kalimhu. The brisa also mentions a carbon ketzach, that's a yishechted it shloi lishma. The brisa says that if it ended up on the mizbeach, a carbon pesach that was shloi lishma, and it ended up on the mizbeach, you leave it there. So the whole brisa seems to be also be talking about kachim kalim. And says the Gemara, not so. Tirguma b'shloi lishma. The psul of shloi lishma, that was what carbon pesach kachim kalim was talking about. And therefore, if it was shloi lishma and it ended up on the mizbeach, leave it there. But we're talking about nishbach dama, where you have no blood to spill. If it's kachin kalim, taka, you would take it off the mizbeach, not like ula. And what the brisa is talking about, will you leave it on if it's kachim? So that brisa is not such a clear raya to ula. Continues the Gemara. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, the kulan, all the animals that had a psul, that the kulan, all this. We don't know what it's talking about. Any kosher animal, any carbon animal, that's what we're going to interpret it. Let's say a carbon oila, shlomim, sha'alu chayim legabe mizbeach. The Mishnah says that if you brought the animal and just let it as a live animal on top of the mizbeach, don't shecht there. Yerdu, take it down. And where should you shecht it? As we've discussed yesterday, where the rings are, right over here. So if you brought the live animal up, take it down and put it by the rings. So we can darshan ha shchutin, if you shechted the animal, even you put the meat on the mizbeach, even if you didn't sprinkle, lo yerdu, don't bring it down. So isn't that what Ula said? My love, isn't the Mishnah talking about loishna, no difference, kachi kachem, loishna kachim kalim, doesn't matter, even kachim kalim, if you happen to shech the animal and brought the meat right away without sprinkling, you would leave it on the mizbeach. So Ula's chiddush is actually what the Mishnah is trying to say, albeit in a diuk. Answers Gemara, loy, don't say that. Ha shchutim, if he was geshachtim, the Mishnah doesn't say what the diuk is. Mehen yerdu, some karbanas you would bring down from the mizbeach, which is a kachin kalim. Mehen lo yerdu, and some kachim you would just leave on the mizbeach if it was shachted and just brought on the mizbeach. Says the Gemara, v'hakulan ketanu. It says the word all of them, and therefore, so we try to say that's the diak. Every type of animal that's geshachten, if it's brought on the mizbeach, even if you didn't sprinkle the blood, even if it's kachim kalim, you don't take it off the mizbeach. Answers the Gemara, no, there's no diak. Kulan achayin. The kulam is telling you just live animals, you have to take it off the mizbeach. If it's a kosher live animal, take it off the mizbeach and shecht it in the north. Says the Gemara Pshita, why not? Of course, you just why should I think that you're allowed to shecht it on the mizbeach? If it's a kosher animal, you'll just shecht it in the north by the rings and then bring it back onto the mizbeach. Answers the Gemara, no. The chiddush is lo'olam achayim. It's talking about a live animal, but the live animal has a vudukin sheba'ayin. It has a cataract in its eyes. So if this live animal, it's a balmum, right, but like a quasi balmum, that if you would take it off the mizbeach and shecht it, you would not be able to bring it back onto the mizbeach because it has a balmum. So the chiddush is that if it ended up live on the animal, I would think if you as a live animal brought it onto the mizbeach, I would think you leave it there. That's the chiddush, that you don't leave it there. Only if you shechted it and it somehow ended up on the mizbeach, then you leave it there. But as a live animal, you just take it off. The Amal who said, "Im alu lo yerdu." If it goes up, if the geshachtana bal boom of abdukin shaba'ayim ended up on the mizbeach, don't take it down. But that's the chiddush of the Mishnah, and has no relation to what Ula said. So Bamaya Kimte, what did you say that this Mishnah is talking about? Our Mishnah, bepsulim, as a pasula animal. It's a pasula animal that ended up on the mizbeach. Ema Sefer. Let's take a look at the end of a Mishnah. The Chain Oila, a Korban Oila, she also Chayel Rosh Mizbeach went alive to the top of the Mizbeach. And let's say this Oila had a psul to it. Tered, you take it down. Shachta b'rosh Mizbeach, but if you shecht it, yavshit, you skin the animal, minateach b'mkoima. And then you cut it up into pieces and put the pieces on the Mizbeach. The psula, if the Mishnah is talking about a apostle or korban, bas havshavitituachu, are you supposed to slice it up and put it onto Mizbeach? V'nitach oisa, Amar Rachman, the Torah says, you slice up into pieces, it, oisa, kashera, only if it's kosher you slice it up. V'loi psula, not a apostle animal. So what's the Sefer talking about if the previous statement before is talking about a psula? The Sefer cannot be talking about a psula animal. And says the Gemara, Sefer Asad Kshera. The Sefer is talking about a kosher korban oila. And a kosher korban oila, if it's alive, you bring it up on the Mizbeach, take it down. But if you happen to have shechted it onto the Mizbeach, then, you know what? Don't take it off the Mizbeach. Do the hefshit and the nituach, the skinning of the animal on the Mizbeach. And that's what the Chiddush is. Take a look. You bring a korban oila onto the Mizbeach, I tell you it's a live animal, take it down and bring it to the rings and shecht it there. But if you were so bold to shecht it onto the Mizbeach, then I'm going to tell you, cut it up into pieces on top of the Mizbeach. Normally, you cut up on pieces by another area in the Beis Hamikdash. Here, because you shechted it on the Mizbeach, do that job on the Mizbeach. And you're allowed to do that. The yesh, the my kamash malam, what's the chiddush? The yesh sheshav netiach b'rosh hamizbeach, that you could skin the animal and slice it up into pieces on top of the Mizbeach. And I guess it's not considered to be like degrading or not nice thing to do that on top of the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, Ulaman diyamad, but there is an opinion that says, Ein hefshef v'nituach b'rosh Mizbeach. You don't do skinning and cutting on top of the Mizbeach. Then what can you say over here? If it's a kosher animal, according to there's another opinion, you have to take it down. So what is the Bryce? The Mishnah must be talking about a pasala animal. So answers the Gemara, and you're right. The end of the Mishnah is talking about a pasala korban. Let's say it had a moment of kashrus. You shechted it on top of the mizbeach, and then you sprinkled the blood somehow, and now you have this slaughtered animal on top of the mizbeach, and let's say a dead sheretz fell on it. So v'nifsala, and everything became pasal. Rab Loza, Rab Shimoni, and the Mishnah goes according to Rab Loza B'Shimon. Since you had the kapara, you shechted it on top of the mizbeach. You did the sprinkling on the mizbeach, and now you went. I guess you did the sprinkling on the bottom of the mizbeach. Then you went back up and took care of the dead animal. You have shitenu. You skin it. V'oyer lekahanim, and the skins belong to the kahanim. I guess, and then I guess the pieces already could be brought onto the mizbeach. It's the ella diktani that it says ketzer ois. So then, would that make sense? If that's what the brisa, if that's what the Mishnah is talking about, then how would you continue on to the Mishnah? Ketzer ois. What should you do? Moisid eser krovayim lamata umadicha. You take the intestines, and then you take it down, and you wash them out. Lumali, why should I do that? Why should I take the intestines off and clean them out when I'm never going to bring them back on to the mizbeach? So the Gemara is understood. What do you expect the guy to do? Heichen navid, what should they do? Nakrivinu b'furtayo, leave it and makrav it with the manure that's inside the animal. Hakravein and all the pchasecha yitzra yisa panecha. Is that something pleasant to be brought onto the mizbeach? That's not what you're supposed to do. So the question is like this. Okay, so you should be once the parts of the korban are on there, bring it on the mizbeach. What the brisa is saying is the intestines cannot be brought onto the mizbeach because it's full of manure. So you take it off the mizbeach. Once you're going to take it off the mizbeach, you're not allowed to bring it on. But the brisa says, okay, take it off the mizbeach and just wash them out. Why should you clean them? You're not bringing them back on the mizbech. Anan hochi kamricha. Madichan lamali. Why are you washing them again? So we're going to answer the Misrami Koyachrina, because if another Koyan picks it up, but Yodan doesn't know that this is a puzzle of carbon, Naskinhu, he's going to bring it up onto Mizbeach. So the Gemara says, we go to Amid Beis, Vana, Neki, Lahu, Lakahana, Milsa Dalsu, Lade, Katala. Are we going to leave something around for a Koyan that he's going to do a mistake? Another Koyan's going to pick it up and thinking, oh, it's hanging around, let me bring it onto the Mizbeach. Why should I clean it for him so that another kohen should come and make a mistake? That's better. We don't want to leave kachikalim in a bad-looking state, intestines full of manure. So just clean it first, and maybe you get lucky, another kohen is going to come along and put it on his back. But even if you're not lucky, but at least it's a clean piece of meat, and that's respect for kachei shemayim. Bottom line, we're going to say the same idea. If the fats of a kachim kalam, the chiddush of ula is that if you shechted a kachim kalam and you didn't do the zrika, you shechted a shlomim, you didn't do the zrika, but you just right away put the fats on the mizbeach, leave it there, even though there's no mi'ila. That was a question Rabbi Yochanan had. Eimer kachim kalam shehe'elu lefnei zrikas damim. Yerdu aloyedu. Rabbi Yochanan had the same question. If the fats of a kachim kalam, you brought it onto the mizbeach before you sprinkled the blood, should you take it off the mizbeach or not? And the question is, because if you don't sprinkle the blood, this fat has no special kedusha to it. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rabami v'tibayilach mila. Then ask a question that if you brought it onto the mizbeach, maybe it has a kedusha to it, and then you'll be chayav meila. Once you put it on the mizbeach, even if it didn't have the zrika, maybe it has the kedusha that you will be liable for meila. Amalei, Rabbi Yochanan answered Rabami, meila loika mebayla. You had no question of meila. The zrika hu the kabayale b'meila. In order to make it holy for meila, you have to have zrika. Ki kamam yirida. But my question is, should you take it off the mizbeach? Upashet, and then Rabbi Yochanan said exactly what Rabbi Ula said. Lo yedu, you don't take it off the mizbeach, the eba hamila, but there's no meila to it. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Masni Hachi Amar Chiba Rabba by Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Nachman Yitzchak had a different version of how Rabbi Yochanan asked the question. Yesh ba mila oiloi. Is there meila or not? Amalei Rabami v'tibayilach yirida. Ask the question if you should take it off the mizbeach. Amalei yirida loikim b'bayilach. I have no question you don't take it off. The nasme lachmei shamazbeach, because once you put it down for Hashem, you can't take it away. The question was regarding meila. Upashad lei lo yedu, don't take it down. The aim behamila, there's no meila to it. So again, let's wrap it up. That what we're talking about over here is if a guy ran the gun, pushed the gun, and as soon as they shechted the kachim kalim, this let's say carbon shlamim or carbon taida, he right away took the fats and brought it onto the mizbeach, and they didn't sprinkle the blood yet. So should you take the fats off the mizbeach? The answer is no. Once it's on the mizbeach, leave it there. It's not as holy as if you would sprinkle the blood, because it doesn't have me'ila to it, but the answer is don't take it down, and it doesn't have me'ila, because once you leave it, once it was put down, so to speak, on the mizbeach, it becomes the bread of the mizbeach, and you're not supposed to pull the plate away. Now the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Kiva said that if an animal has a mum and it ended up onto the mizbeach, don't take it down. But that's only if it had a mum like a cataract, which would heal itself. Hoyel uksheim ba'oifis, because if a bird had a cataract, it's not even considered a mum. So by an animal, it's not such a real psul. So if it ended up on the mizbeach, leave it there. But if an animal was missing a limb or something like that, then and you ended up on the mizbeach, then you take it off. But the idea of the cataract situation is that you will magdish it first, and then it developed a cataract. Because if it had a cataract first, then the kedusha would not go on to the animal. Rabbi Kiva says, an oila, which is a female, an oila is supposed to be a male, but if you made it into a female, That doesn't. There's no kedusha there. The shekadam muba lehagdesh. It's like the mum came before the hegdish damya and a oilas nekeva, oila nekeva. If it ended up on the mizbeach, you take it off. Now the Gemara asks a fascinating question, and this will end. We'll end in 2 minutes. Boya Reb Yirmiyah. Reb Yirmiyah had a question. We know there's a concept called roiva v'nirva. Roiva that apostles an animal to become a carbon. Roiva if the animal had relations with a female, or nirba, a male human being, had relations with an animal. So the question is, yesh an animal, a bird cannot have relations with a female. A female human and a bird cannot work, but it's possible for a male to have relations with a female bird. So it doesn't cut both ways. So the question is, yesh nirba ba'oifis or ein nirba ba'oifis? Is there a concept of nirba on oifis or not, or by birds? Mi omar min behema loitzes or raveya v'nirba. By an animal, you have both sides, raveya and a nirba. Kol heicha the isa b'raveya, isa b'nirba. Kol heicha the leisa b'raveya, leisa b'nirba. An animal can have a nirba and a raveya. So therefore, that is a psul by an animal. But a bird doesn't have that. It doesn't have a raveya. A male bird cannot do relations with a female human being. Dilma maybe, hare nevda by avera, but at the end of the day, if this female bird had relations with a man, it had to have an avera done with it. Could be it's not kosher for a carbon. So the Gemara says, Rabba said Toshma. Rab Kiva machshav b'bali mumim. Rab Kiva said it's machshav b'bali mumim because it doesn't apply by oifis. Since a nirba, Rab Kiva should also make it kosher by a nirba, since by a nirba it would be kosher by birds. Shema mina, nirba is not kosher by a bird, and therefore Rab Kiva would even be machbe by a nirba. Omar Rab Nachba Yitzchak, Omar Rab Nanam Taninima, Hanirba, Vamuksa, Vaneva, Vesta, Vachir, Vatuntima, Droinkinis, Kula Mitama, Begodim, Abeseblia, Shema mina. So we put nirba by a bird, and it's talking about Beisablia, which is a bird, and we consider nirba as one of the psulim for a bird to become a carbon. Shma mina. So that's an interesting thing about a bird, that although a bird cannot do reveya, but since a bird could become a nirba by a male human being having relations with a female bird, so it could become possible as a carbon. And unlike an animal could go reva and nirba, a bird could only be a nirba, not a reveya, but if it's a nirba, it could become possible for a carbon. Okay, we're going to continue tomorrow, B'ez Hashem. Okay.